A surprising collection of 4.1 million recipes across all of human cooking just got published. We're going to cover that today. Some big opportunities for chefs with in-real-life events, a restaurant that's allowing workers to become owners for a price, and more. Welcome back to the Repertoire Podcast. My name is Justin Khanna. I'm here with Ray Delucci, bringing you another Repertoire Report. This is where we break down industry news, trends, insights to help you become more informed as a hospitality professional. Ray, we did it. 2,000 subscribers, man. Kudos.
2005 now, so
Heck
we're
yeah.
continually going. Next is 3K is
I
our
love
next
it.
milestone. So please subscribe if you're listening.
And yeah, share the show with a friend. Anybody who maybe works with you as a station partner, your co-culinary school students together, just you are used to work together at specific restaurants. We just love getting you folks some of this content because we spend a lot of time jamming on this, and I think it's just fun to show up. And the industry seems like in early days of doing this podcast, I used to like struggle to get enough stories. I would sometimes feel like I had filler content, but now we have just double the people. It's you and I putting our heads together to get this stuff. And we're doing it at a much more like, consistent and regular cadence. And I sometimes feel like I'm having to say no to stories to kind of like include them in the docket because there's just so much stuff going on here. So anyways, let's start with this story that I saw. It's from a company called Epicure. And so we're going to basically dig in here. This was sent to me by a friend of the show, Brendan. He's been on the show as an interview guest, and then I just saw this on my X timeline as I was kind of scrolling through stuff. I'm calling this teaching AI to taste, and there's going to be some caveats here that we have to go into. That's my pithy hook that I'm starting with here. And so this is a new paper titled Epicure: Navigating the Emergent Geometry of Food Ingredient Embeddings. Okay, so this sounds complicated. And for a long time, getting computers to understand food has been this clunky process. And this is something that you and I, Ray, have covered on the show before, this stereotypical tech bro problem of kind of elbowing their way into the kitchen or some sort of hospitality setting and saying, we can just brute force technology into this and magically make it better. And between the Blue Aprons of the world or insert the, build your own prep list philosophy, or again, some of even the AI tools that are, again, feel very clunky in this modern iteration of AI. It's going to get better. It's going to improve. But it does sometimes feel like it's not as easy as people make it, seem to be. And so before the process, what it used to look like, before what these researchers figured out, I need to give all of the caveats also here at the top of the show. I'm not a researcher on this. I have no involvement in this paper. I'm not a data scientist. And I do have some criticisms that I'm going to share towards the end here. But I'm also more than happy to get corrected in the comments if there's anybody who's like reading this differently, perceiving different things than I am. If I'm off on something, obviously I just want to make that known. I also want to understand this for myself because this seems like a breakthrough. This big of a corpus of information was going to be processed because, Ray, correct me if I'm wrong here. There's like potential IP concerns here. We've covered do chefs own dishes as they create specific recipes at restaurants. All of this was very confusing to me as to how they decided they were, and they're very good at citing sources. I'm not necessarily saying that they stole, stuff or trained on things that they did not have access to train on. They are very, very clear on the fact that they had corpuses of data from like in English recipe libraries that they just kind of took as training data, and they had access to it, and they, trained these specific models. There's 3 of them. Spoiler alert, we're going to get into that. But basically, I wanted to share my takeaways from reading through this, and I probably spent the better of like 2 hours on this in prep for this episode. So instead of having humans populate a database of these recipes and basically saying what flavors are or are not acceptable, tying them together, you're telling the AI what makes sense for food. And Ray, I actually had a project where I did this, believe it or not, when the first kind of like custom GPTs became available for public use. I was like, what's a really low hanging fruit here, possibility, utility, provide value here? And also selfishly, what can help me in my workflow? This was back in the day when I was running a culinary program at an event production company. And so I basically trained a custom GPT to become a set maker for me, where I basically used PDF copies of the Flavor Bible and Culinary Artistry, and I use that as training data. And then the goal would basically be that you can input what you have in your walk-in, you can input what your purveyors have, and it would list out sets for you. And the reason behind that is because I knew that there was nuancy specifics or like hiccups that I would often run into with some of these AI tools. This was back with like ChatGPT 3, I'm almost positive was the model back then. They've obviously gotten much, much better since then. But I would get frustrated sometimes when I would ask it to do a recipe and it would deliver me this very either inaccurate or not so useful result. And so I said, okay, let's not go that far. Let's use this corpus of knowledge from the Flavor Bible. And I can say, I have something like beets, and it would basically spit out something like, beet, goat cheese, orange, tarragon. Or I would get another set based on something that I would say, I have something on hand, and it would say, hamachi, Thai basil, coconut, Fresno chili. And then for those that aren't familiar, that is typically in a lot of kitchens how you will create something called a set, which is a almost skeleton for the dish that's going to be on the menu. We've also seen trends of people listing sets as actually that's how the menu reads. And it's this like everything's in lowercase font and there's slashes between, the ingredients. And that is sometimes done to not introduce expectation to the guest. You're going to say, I'm not going to tell you how I'm preparing the hamachi, but just so you know, that's, what's on this dish. So you, as a look back on what this menu had featured, these are the ingredients that we had. And then you as the chef, you have the ability to take that set and make those additional decisions from there. And so these researchers, instead of doing what I did, giving it this knowledge that was already pre-built by humans, they started from scratch. And they had this big list of recipes, and they forced the AI to read a reported 4.1 million recipes across 7 different languages. And then bolstering it, so they not just the recipes, they gave it additional data with a massive database of chemical flavor compounds. They didn't tell the AI any of these ingredients and what they were. They basically just said, look at these recipes and look at these chemical charts and figure out the rules of food. And so herein lies one of the unique outcomes of that process. It wasn't just one massive model. This also kind of like falls in line with what I've been building at Chef Tech Stack as I'm realizing what you folks are using and I'm having conversations with you folks. There's actually a form in the description if you're interested in giving your insights there and helping us build out Chef Tech Stack and just telling us what tools you're using, how you're using them, some frustrations that you have. I'm basically gathering a group of select people to be a part of the alpha for that. And so if that's something that would be of interest, link in the description for that. And even if you don't want to, jump on a call with me, if you're short on time, even just filling out the form, it takes about 5-10 minutes to do. It would be really, really helpful for us. And so they decided it's not just one model they need 3. And so they basically have one model called COOC, C-O-O-C, which is short for occurrence. So it's co-occurrence, specifically recipe co-occurrence. And basically what that does is it learns what ingredients physically show up in the pan together. And then it decides that, okay, there's connections here. These have repeatedly shown up. There's, like correlations here. And so I want to map that. And so if you ask COOC, C-O-O-C, which is also a funny play on words, it says, okay, chicken is in the pan often with garlic and onions and carrots. I'm going to map that as kind of this cluster of data together, and I'm going to plot that. Okay, the second one is CHEM, C-H-E-M, and that's short for, obviously, chemistry, which ignored the recipes entirely and just looked at chemical flavor molecules. And so if you ask Chem a question like, what pairs with chicken, same ingredient, it's not going to, scour those recipes. It's going to look for proteins that share the same molecular makeup as chicken. So it's going to deliver you a result like beef or pork. And then the last one is core, which is basically a combination of the two, where it's infusing the chemistry as well as the recipe data. And so what you can look at, and again, we're going to link this in the description, is visualizable. And so you have this massive interconnected node system. It kind of like forms this shape. And you can, again, look at all the charts and the graphs and all of that. But you can zoom in. What's really, really cool about the way that they've decided to take this and make it available for everybody to basically look at is you can like take Yuzu and then you can like track and like zoom into that section of the plots and you can see how they connect to each other. And what's funny about some of these scientific papers and the way that, like there's data and then they have to take the data and make it readable. And so you kind of have to like navigate. I have like 6 different URLs that I ended up opening as I was researching this story. And so there's a couple examples that the paper cites. There's also a couple of examples that like the creators of this, the researchers have cited. And so let's say that you take chocolate as an example and you steer it towards the concept of sweet baking. These models are going to give you what you would expect, something like cocoa powder, vanilla, baking powder. This is like what we would suggest chocolate. These are, as we've received these repeated examples, this is what the results are going to show. But if you can do something in this model, which is again a unique way of representing all of this stuff and adding all of these other different components to this, is you can have what they are calling cultural dials being, like tweaked in one way or another. Because remember, across like Turkish cuisine and Chinese cuisine and French cuisine, like East Asian cuisine, like all of this stuff has been like added together. the AI smoothly transitions something where you're going to say, okay, I want this more East Asian, not, necessarily what you said, which was cocoa powder, vanilla, baking powder. And it's going to land on things like red bean paste and matcha and purple sweet potato that still work with chocolate. But again, it's like a different type of cuisine leaning or genre that it's going to kind of steer you in. And then you can actually do it in the reverse. You can say, instead of more of this, I want you to subtract a cuisine from an ingredient and then add in another. And then because it has the chemical makeup insights, it can actually basically take that and show you peers of ingredients or ways where substitutions might make sense. This really came to mind as I was thinking about, potential allergy substitutions. You can input your already existing menu into something like this, and then it can spit you out potential alternatives that don't change the dish that much, or you can still have it be something that stays in line with the cuisine that you do. One of the examples is a Mexican pantry that you decide to steer it in, where it's going to take chicken and say, 60% Mexican pantry here, and it's going to confidently spit out cotija cheese, poblano peppers, and salsa verde. And so in isolation, this might get you super excited. It might, like, if you're the type of person who was like me, I was already trying to create a custom GPT for this for myself. You have menu writing as a large part of your week, and this might genuinely help save you time. Some of you, might get really, really excited about this. On the other end of the spectrum, some of you might balk at this. You might be genuinely nervous that your job is in jeopardy. And so I'm here to, again, go past just the research paper. And, again, kudos to the researchers for doing all of this work. I was looking at the timeline on how they, put all this together. And this is several years in the making. This is not just, an AI hyped thing that they just decided to direct a bunch of compute power at and just burn a bunch of tokens and basically get some output here. Basically, I'm hopeful that if you want to go deeper into any of this, we have some links in the show notes. There's going to be obviously the full papers, as well as there's things like a GitHub repo for this, where the flavor graph has the full published paper. You can go really deep here based on, what they've decided to publicly share, which I also think is really, really cool. There's South Korea, I think, is where most of the researchers are based here. And in the GitHub page was a really specific line that I want to use to kind of base my, I'll call it criticism, nuanced take, whatever you want to label this as. They have this line that says, quote, "Such sophisticated and meticulous work so far has been determined by the intuition of talented chefs," end quote. And that, I think, is where I almost draw the line or say, we have some job security still. This, to me, does not replace the work of chefs in professional kitchens in genuinely, coming up with menus. If you're going to be the person who's going to say, okay, directionally, this is where we want to head, or, okay, from a concept level, we're deciding we want to work with these ingredients and maybe get a starting place for some of this stuff. I think that's really, really useful. But when we're talking about the fact that chefs kind of over the time, as you're building your palette, you can kind of figure some of this stuff out. I'm even looking at the paper now, and they have stuff that even chefs don't really necessarily talk about here. I'll read through some of these. Balsamic, citrus, earthy, fatty, floral, fruity, green, meaty, minty, nutty, spicy, vegetable, wine-like, and woody. And then they also go into some of the other ones that are, I think, a little bit more obvious as we're talking about flavor, which is sweet, bitter, savory, pungent, and sour. It's very, very interesting that salt does not come up anywhere here, because obviously that is not something that at baseline you can take a piece of fennel and say, okay, there's salt on here, because, that is something that, again, the chef has to manually go in and do. And so this is my core pushback, basically. The wall that I basically hit as I was coming up with that custom GPT that I made is, for someone like me in the role I was in when I was managing a culinary program, it was incredibly useful for me to get sets suggested to me, because I could say, I have short ribs in inventory, I have some ramps, I have 8 other ingredients, and oh yeah, the client wants avocado in the menu somewhere. I don't know where yet, but the client has specifically requested that they want to see avocado in some way, shape, or form here. And then I could instruct it to say, for each of the 6 dishes that I'm going to present to the client, give me 5 example sets. So I want 30 sets basically presented to me. And then I could use my almost, decade plus of experience to make the final call. And then, boom, at least that got me close enough to a sample menu where I could send that to the client, get that approved, and then I could do the legwork to basically finalize the details later. But the obvious question for anyone who's written menus before is okay, cool, we have the set. Once you've nailed that in a menu meeting, anybody who's done this knows that, what are the details that come after here? If we're going to do the beet, goat cheese, orange, tarragon example that I gave, there are at least a dozen follow-up questions that need to get finalized there. across things like cooking methods and knife cuts and additional manipulations or recipes. Like if you're going to do an orange gelée on that dish, who has that recipe? What's the texture of the gelée that we want? What's the sweetness level and the acidity level? There's questions on plating, ratios that show up on the final plate. Like the list goes on here. And so what's funny about this to me as someone who's in charge of managing people too, is that just because you give an employee a set or you give a chef de partie something that you guys have come up in the menu meeting, it does not mean that what comes to life on the plate is what panned out in your head. Just because the set that you decided on was like, okay, cool, we're going to do this. Somebody's vision and execution can come to life completely differently based on things like, seasonings that we haven't even, again, like dug into or the paper can't even cover, because that's the stuff that varies in execution to execution that even gets into the nuances operationally of, okay, cool, this dish has been around forever. This set has been something that this restaurant has been doing for ages, but the dish that Ray and I had when we went out to dinner that night was just off because, again, things like sweetness and acidity and salt and bitterness and even temperature and texture play a huge part in what that final dish comes out and then what hits that guest's palate. And so it's interesting to me that they've mapped out a lot of this. I have not seen recipes and food visualized in this way before, but, just because you have an orange and that's on the set doesn't mean that you're going to supreme that and put that on the plate naked. You're probably going to, manipulate it in other ways. So it's a cool project in my mind. The size of this data set alone is really, really impressive. I'm very, very curious to see, because this is relatively open source, if there are going to be forks from this that people genuinely end up creating, and then that becomes a productive tool for people. But similar to that Anthropic paper, Ray, that we covered a couple weeks back, I still think we've got some semblance of job security, at least in the reasonable short term. I'm very, very curious your thoughts on this Epicure announcement.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway I would have is I think why a food or a flavor Bible is so popular is when I saw 4.1 million recipes, I was like, there's no way I'm going to start getting any great information right away out of this. It's almost too much. And I'm of the belief that when you're coming up with recipes, when you're coming up with new menu items, constraints are actually what allows for creativity, right? So if I were to go tell someone starting out in their career, go make a dish for my menu, for a restaurant menu, it's almost impossible. You will find that they don't really do well. If you say, I want a Mediterranean dish, maybe this amount of plated final components even, you can get really granular into nutrition. That is much easier, and you get a much better product because of those constraints. And so I think what your point was, and the wall you were hitting of all this data, all these recipes, it's like something like the Flavor Bible is beautiful because it's this physical thing you can kind of peruse over, and it constrains you into what's locked into those pages, which is still a vast amount of information. And I wonder, I haven't had the best success with recipe development off of an AI tool. I've played with it a little bit, and it's just not something that I find useful just yet. Because while it can access whatever, the core principle still has to be kind of set, and that's set by your chef, that's set by your boss, by your own constraints and demands. It's interesting for sure, and I think there's a lot to be gained in trends and information and all the other items that they're going to gather from this. But to your point, yeah, I don't know if the AI are here to really take over the human chef creativity.
I love it. I am just going to keep an eye on this and see again, this is a research project at its core. And there are some examples that they give on the Epicure. It's epicure.kaikaku.ai. And they have some examples where you can go to a tab that's called Recipe Collection, and it's called Gallery. And you literally just have to wait. And then it auto-generates, I've visited this page 3 times today. And it basically, from scratch, I don't know if it's from scratch or if it's pulling from a library here, but it basically populates not just recipes, because you can click into each of these cards and view them, but each of them has an AI generated photo that goes along with it. And so I have a pan-seared sea bass with roasted beet puree. And to our credit, some of the stuff that Ray and I have been talking about on the show, Ray, you more than me, I think, is some of the specifics with the way recipes are laid out, the way that weights are calculated, the way that, as you're working through the process, things are included in that list order. All of that's really good. And it's tagging ingredients properly. As I'm, working with some other founders here on AI companies that are trying to get allergy tracking sorted, prep lists dialed in. Again, that's something where it might turn into something where some of these more operationally focused tools have the ability to pull in this data set, and then it has the ability to be more useful. But even the way they tag some of this stuff is complexity and then it says casual dining. And I was looking at some other recipes earlier today where it would say like fine dining, and it's like I don't necessarily know if I agree with that way of classifying things.
To your point, if you're on epicure.kaikaku.ai, I like this page here that you were discussing about. It has like 1,790 ingredients. Like, let's just say I wanted to do something with tofu. Like this, I could see this being pretty interesting. Like that flavor graph. There's the base, and it goes to bird's eye chili, but that's kind of the where I would start asking questions. It's like, it has scallions, but then, like, why is scallion the main point there? Why is Thai bird's eye chili the main point to tofu? It seems like an imperfect system, to your point.
Right.
I will say that with this AI, I was at the National Restaurant Association show last week, and while we have some cool videos, maybe I'll share them on the Repertoire social channels, but there was one robot that was voice activated, and it was an arm, and it made me a drink. It made me like a cocktail. And I had to ask it like 4 times for this cocktail, and unfortunately it didn't do it right away. And so like the guy had to come up and talk to it more firmly, and maybe I was a little shy, so maybe that's why it didn't work. I'm not really sure. But it made the drink, but it was just like, it was a very basic function of if it got the like syrup in the water, and then it literally just shook it like this and then poured it, and like that was it. And while it was cool, I'm like, yeah, they're working on it, it's coming, but food is so it's so adept. I covered last week, Justin, that Starbucks stopped using their AI inventory counting on milk because it was doing so poorly, and that they were just having humans count. So like AI is very hard there's a lot of difficulty in getting it adopted into restaurants right now.
The funny part about all of this too is I worked in a lot of really hyper seasonal places in especially my time in fine dining kitchens. And a big thing that really smacks you in the head as you're working in some of these environments is that throughout the season, a singular ingredient also changes. Like you put beet on or like take a citrus or maybe a fruit or a vegetable that has varying levels of flavor intensity, and you basically have this problem where it's like the insert ingredient we got last week is not the same as what we're receiving this week, whether it's a size problem, a moisture level problem, a level of sweetness problem, all of this bitterness problem, like all of this stuff ends up factoring in that just because you map something in this data scientific way doesn't necessarily mean like you have to make that judgment call sometimes as a leader in the kitchen, or sometimes if you're working a station, it's like, hey, I actually need to have a little bit more of this, or I need to add more of the sweetening agent in this, or I need to season this a little bit differently. I need to puree this or cook this out for longer because of XYZ thing that literally nature is dictating. It's not something where, all of these ingredients are coming out of a conveyor belt. You know what I mean? Yep. Some of that also is something that I don't always feel like some of these tools factor in. And that is also something that can often pose a problem for you, which kind of ties into the Reddit post you went into in your last episode, where it's like, I'm getting different results from what the recipes are saying. Not to entirely give my take on that. We don't have to, dig into that here, but I think that is something that I would, maybe impress on this person, is the fact that sometimes it is not the most consistent process in the world because the variables in the equation are not the most consistent. It's nature, it's product from the ground that you're working with here, and things change throughout the season. So it's just something that I like to add as a caveat to not basically allow people to use their brains and think through some of this stuff and not default to like, oh, well, the recipe said this and it's not working, therefore it's the recipe's problem. It's like, if you have that ability to be a little bit more principle focused and question the process when the variables change. That's the thing that I teach in Total Station Domination. It's just something that I try to hammer into people because I think it ends up being more useful in your time in some of these kitchens than just defaulting to the default, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. So I wanted to go into another story that I saw on Instagram, and this particularly hits home to me because I've had some frustrations in coming out with this Michelin guide deep dive episode for a long time here. I've had desires to make this episode. I've had some frustrations in researching it. And then in this kind of way that Michelin is changing and expanding, I'm kind of like waiting for a moment where we have some pause from them or like, even we haven't covered it, Ray, I don't think, but the Green Star detraction that Michelin has kind of announced or decided to make a change on is something where it's not always possible. I gave that whole meta of Michelin diatribe where it was like, this is changing. It's a moving target. Yes, it's the same organization. Yes, the stars are quote unquote the same, But even in that, it's like, oh, we were a 3-star restaurant that had a green star. You can't say that anymore. You know what I mean? Because they detracted that. And so this person on Instagram named Drew Stevenson came out with this piece, and I want to read the kind of carousel that he laid out and wrote, and then I kind of want to get your thoughts on some of this stuff, because it is something that I certainly have run into as we're talking about language that Michelin uses, and again, some of these other qualms that you will sometimes see in this world of accolades and awards, and then sometimes how that ties into other stuff that we've talked about on the show before with like abusive environments or places where it's almost in pursuit of the awards and the accolades at all costs, whether that's the cost of your staff's well-being or financial costs or any of these other sort of implications. And so in the caption, it says, "Who do you think is the primary author of a Michelin star? I asked several chefs, industry professionals, writers, and serious diners who deserves the most credit for a Michelin star. Surprisingly, the answers varied widely from person to person. The more conversations I had, the more I realized the question is far more nuanced than it first appears." And so I want to read some of these. And so each of these is its own kind of standalone, carousel piece. We can kind of go through some of them, and then we'll, share our thoughts towards the end here. So it says, quote, "When a restaurant receives a star, who walks on stage? Usually the chef. Who receives the Michelin jacket? Usually the chef. Who becomes the public face of the award? Again, usually the chef. So even if Michelin officially awards the restaurant, their own presentation of the award often centers around the chef. Michelin technically does not recognize the phrase Michelin starred chef," end quote. And I'll pause there because, Ray, that's language that you and I have used in titles before. That's right. That's language I've used in my writings in the newsletter in the past. And it's
language I've used in my past career once when I said I wanted to be a Michelin starred chef.
Totally. And so it is this funny thing where, again, the organization who's literally dishing out these awards does not, again, like, maybe somebody can find some social media post from Michelin that, they technically at one point use this in one way, shape, or form. But in a lot of ways, and I'll dive back into the quotes here, quote, "The stars belong to restaurants, but culturally, the industry clearly uses the phrase anyway." And that phrase being Michelin starred chef. And honestly, it's not hard to understand why. If a chef, and then this is a list of dot points, created the menu, shaped the identity of the cuisine, trained the team, controls the execution, embodies several of Michelin's core criteria, then people naturally associate the star with the chef. And so this is almost like a brand thing. There is a correlation that you're drawing between this award that was granted and the individual who is maybe a leader in that organization. Quote, "Maybe the answer changes from restaurant to restaurant. Sometimes the star feels truly tied to the restaurant itself. Sometimes it is tied almost entirely to one chef. Sometimes it belongs to a team. Saying the restaurant has the star might be technically correct, but that can miss how nuanced authorship actually becomes once you start looking closer," end quote. And so all of this really comes into play, whereas I've kind of, I had this concept that I wrote about in a newsletter called an experience engine, right? Where it was basically like 5 components to a business that I would personally want. Again, I can't speak for everybody here, but it's like what I can see repeated across multiple businesses that have all of the things that I claim to want in my career at some point in time with restaurants. So profitability, longevity, the word of mouth recommendation from people, this kind of broadly accepted, this is a good place. And all of these things much more aligned with, they almost detract from this idea of the chef at the helm. And that's something you and I have kind of been beating the drum of over the past couple episodes, is this idea of not pedestalizing the chef as much. I know that you have a co-chef story that you want to talk about later in the episode today. And so all of this was really, really interesting to dig into because I don't necessarily have an answer. And I don't think, Michelin will say one thing, but then I think as we're looking at the way that things like Knife Edge, which just got, I think, renewed for season 2 on Apple TV, profile some of these concepts, it is like the head chef is the one who gets the focus and the airtime and the cameras following that person around for the entire episode. And so in a lot of ways, it makes it seem like, the chef is the one who gets the award. And they even give some of the examples in the post on Instagram here of like, that's the person who goes on stage to accept the award. And they might, give the speech where they thank their team and all of those sorts of things. But it is not a situation where, the restaurant is closed and the whole team goes on stage, at least not for the current iterations of how the ceremonies work. And some of those are practicalities, right? Like you can't, close the entire restaurant for the day because that would be too costly from a revenue loss perspective. I just thought it was a really interesting way to highlight some of these discrepancies. And these kind of fall in line with some of the other contradictions that I've seen Michelin talk about. We've covered that in other awards that we've tried to highlight, or newcomers to the scene of giving stars and awards and listicles and all of those sorts of things, is Michelin claims that, okay, well, we only decide to evaluate quote unquote the food, but then there's other examples where restaurants put, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars into renovations because they want the space to be quote unquote worthy of Michelin's attention. And that doesn't always necessarily map with, what we have seen other organizations claim to value. And so I'm curious your thoughts on this post if you got a chance to read it.
Yeah, I actually saw this, and it's funny that you added this to the notes because I saw it last week, and I found it interesting, this idea of the chef. And I think the industry would be better off if it was a restaurant, if it was a brand, right? Like the biggest brands in food or the biggest brands in any industry are the top tier, but the biggest brands in the chef fine dining world are the actual chefs themselves and not necessarily the brand. When you think of Noma, you probably would have put Rene Redzepi over Noma. When you think of the French Laundry, you're putting Thomas Keller over the French Laundry. Alinea, you're putting Grant Achatz over Alinea. And so when you get to an industry where the one person brand is kind of the all being like the chef that gets the Michelin star, then I think that leads to a total like just shift in framework where if you're saying, oh, I want to go work in a Michelin star or be a chef in a Michelin star restaurant, you're going and working towards a collaborative goal with people. Whereas if you go to say, I want to be a Michelin starred chef, the framework is more so that you want to be this like anchor to which all the successes may be built around or revolves around. And I even think like that framing inherently leads to different outcomes throughout people's careers. And I know that for me, I wanted to be a Michelin starred chef. It never was like, oh, I wanted to be a Michelin star restaurant owner or whatever. And so, yeah, I think that designation is strange. I think the mincing or parsing of words that Michelin does is also not very helpful because at the end of the day, of course, the chef is going up there and receiving the award. It'd be interesting to see if they make any changes to this brand going forward. But yeah, I don't know. I think the sole chef on a pedestal continues with the Michelin Guide, and that's maybe one of my more my biggest qualm with it.
I think that's maybe one of the more bolstering aspects of my cook to chef to entrepreneur progression that I talk about sometimes is that if you ultimately decide you're going to make that leap and identity change yourself from thinking about, okay, I'm the chef of this thing to this is my business, now that turns into a very different conversation where you could ultimately, I don't know, man, like have that be the conversation or the self-talk that you have is that I want my business to have Michelin stars. You know what I mean? Like it's a very subtle, thing, but it does turn into something that it's not this thing where, okay, well, I'm going to get the stars and then I'm going to, F off and I'm going to do the TV thing. Again, everybody's, goals in their career are going to be different. I'm not going to try to tell anybody one way or another. I do think it's an interesting exercise to think through the ramifications of how does my decision-making change? How does, again, like my self-talk adjust itself if I decide I'm going to not make myself the thing that the planets orbit around, do you know what I mean? And then I make the business, the thing that I'm working on instead of working in, be the focus. Again, I'm not going to tell you how to live your life, but it is something that helps me as I'm thinking about, the career and the fact that it's long and there's time to achieve different things throughout your tenure. So I'll turn it over to you. What do you got?
Line Cook Reddit, always fun. Justin, I thought you'd be interested in this one. You haven't read this yet. I'll read it for you. It's a restaurant thread with the title. Basically, it's asking, fake it till you make it in restaurants. And so someone says, I know I'm going to get a lot of slack, but I see myself using fake it till you make it a little bit better. I applied for a line cook position saying I have several years experience. In reality, I only have 6.5 weeks on flat top and fryer.
Whoa.
With most experience in the dish pit. So I know kitchen lingo and all that. I applied to a golf course near me. My previous experience, like I said, consists of mostly dish with a decent amount of flat top fryer and prep. I also have my own 3-piece knife set and will buy my own digital thermometer. The main question is, do I have a better chance than others using fake it till you make it?
I don't exactly know what this person is talking about using fake it till you make it. This literally just talks about, I don't know, like lying on your resume or overinflated. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's lying on your resume, but he says, do I have a chance?
Sure,
in the thread. And then I guess the question is, do I have a chance of maybe if I get this job staying there with the faking it till you make it on the resume?
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think you really necessarily faked anything. Like I don't know. Depending on the complexity of the menu at this golf course, is there a world where like 6.5 weeks on a flat top and a fryer, depending on how you like navigated your work through that, like you could learn a lot. That if there's certain things from a knife skills perspective, again, the way that this person is talking about their knife set, again, I'm not trying to bash anybody here, but it's like, okay, I have a 3-piece knife set. Like that doesn't tell me, anything about your ability to dice onions or like chop herbs. But it is something where I'm not going to discount this person entirely and say that this person has no skills. That's why we talk about repertoire on this show and, all the stuff that we do, not to bring that into the fold here, but it is something where it's not that this person's starting from zero. This person might have the ability to manage multiple orders and, have their timings nailed and do platings with some level of efficiency here. And so if this person is going to be open-minded enough to say, I'm going to need some training in this new context anyways, there is an element of, if you're willing to be open-minded and trainable and you have a good attitude, this person clearly wants to be in the industry in some sort of capacity. I think that there's a level of actually, okay, the attitude is good here. It's not that this person, like my first job at the restaurant that I worked in Wisconsin, I truly was coming from zero. Like I had some classroom experience at the community college culinary school that I would take as half days because I had all my credits completed in high school and I could spend a half day to try to help to reduce the financial burden of CIA. I was literally trying to get credits transferred from this community college to CIA. And that was all the experience I had. And I was very upfront with the head chef of this concept. And they were willing to take a chance on me because that's the structure of that kitchen. It was literally like the head chef, the dishwasher, and me. Like that was the kitchen team. It was not that complicated. And so I worked like the cold section garde manger, and I would like help plate some of the hot dishes during service as entrees were kind of going out. That was the structure of that. I was able to get trained up relatively quickly on that. And so it is not something where I needed to like, lie or in any way, shape, or form. I just was able to show up and be teachable, trainable, and that was able to get me what I needed in that specific role. And then the question there becomes, okay, how long are you going to stay at that, level? I think that there's obviously something that I had talked about in other pieces, which is this like arbitrary tenure amount that often gets touted in the industry. Oh, well, I'm going to work as a chef de partie here for 2 years. Oh, well, I'm going to stay here. You need to work the dish pit for X amount of months or years before you have, like the ability to, or, the credentials to be able to quote unquote move up in the brigade. And I think anybody who's worked in, either a specific station or on a seasonal section of a menu where the menu doesn't change, you get brought up to speed relatively quickly. Like if you were to plot out your learnings, it's like a pretty sharp, like you really kind of got to get your bearings quickly. But then it's almost like you kind of level out. It's an arbitrary, amount, but it's like after 2 weeks of working on a station, you have a pretty good handle of like what to expect. The way that prep works, how long specific components last on your station, how service flows, where you get stuck, like the things you need to be over communicating on, or, like sandbag a little bit on your station, where you can get ahead throughout your week. And so it's this funny thing where 6.5 weeks is not a lot of time at all. Saying that you have, what did this person say, several years of experience, like that's a little bit of a, maybe don't do that. But I do think that it's something where, you have the ability to, there's that Naval quote. It's like, if I only did the things that I was qualified for, I'd still be pushing a broom around. And so that's the thing that I kind of push back on these people who are going to talk about, tenure and, well, don't do it until you're ready. And it's like, they never define what ready, is. And so that's the thing that I get really proud of as we're talking about like the way that I decided to quantify cooking performance in the station score evaluation for total station nomination. You can literally see where you're at on your station out of 100. And then that gives you the ability to say, okay, if I'm on garde manger and I have a 93 station score, it's like, man, I have like some reasonable semblance of I have the skills required to be able to make the push to go to my manager and say, I'm interested in working hot app station. You know what I mean? When there's an opportunity to, again, you got to kind of take this with a little bit of nuance and not have too much of a big head on your shoulders. But I do think that there's like, I like the fake it till you make it in certain regards. You know what I mean? Like the other quick story. Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick, there's someone made a comment, and I would say that like the 7 years, I definitely wouldn't suggest just because, or the several years, because you're gonna inevitably be asked, and then you're just kind of building out this life of lies on where you worked.
Yes.
Good framework that I think that you've shared before is instead of fake it till you make it, it's like being honest. I haven't done everything, but I can do anything that you teach me to do, and I think that has gotten me very far in not only cooking but just in other aspects of items I wanted to work on. Where it's like, I might not know everything, but I will work as hard as I can to learn it and, be successful at it. So give me that shot. And that
Totally.
often goes over really well.
Yep. Yep. I mean, like an example of a job that I got was like I got declined from the job because I didn't have enough experience. And then I ended up showing up at an event that chef did. And I basically said, I know that you're upset that, I know that you're not impressed, I think is the language that I used at the experience that I have. But I'm genuinely very compelled by this project and I want to continue to show up and be a participating member of this team. And that was enough, showing my attitude, showing my willingness to, again, like be a engaged team member was enough for that chef to take a chance on me and hire me. And so all of that, I think, is something where this person is showing some of these things that other chefs would kill to have in an employee. Like the literally the willingness to put your reputation on the line and lie, quote unquote. Maybe that's not the most exemplary quality of this person, but it is like my attitude is such that I really want to participate here. Other people would kill for that. They have somebody who's incredibly skilled, but is just like could not be bothered to care in the environment. And so all of that, I think, like also showing your willingness to like lean a little bit more on the experience you do have. That's maybe the place where I'll close it here, is that we are not always the best because we lived in these environments and these roles and these experiences to actually share with a potential employer what we bring to the table based on our previous experience. And so cool, you worked 6.5 weeks on flat top and fryer. What are the specific skills? What are the specific things you can bring to a team? What did you learn or in the current menu that this golf course has, what can you point to and say, these are things that I have experience with and familiarity with, and I feel comfortable doing these things. And then also the dish experience I have. You might look at that and say, oh, that didn't teach me anything. Ray, I think you and I both try to do our best to like highlight dishwashing experience and dishwashers in general as a role as being both crucially important and something that you can develop a ton of skills in a role like that. And lead on some of those things and say, I have the ability to, again, you talked about the kitchen lingo, like I know how to move about a kitchen. I know how to manage and like work with a sense of urgency, like all of these things you can put down on your resume or bring up in an interview because of this experience that you've developed, even though it doesn't feel like what you might want, which is several years of kitchen experience. So again, maybe we post this on Reddit, maybe we don't, maybe the person who wrote this finds this video, maybe they don't. But those are, again, my thoughts. I don't know if that's useful for this person. All right, my next story comes to my feed because I think it's just local to me. The Seattle Times came out with a piece called Farmers Market Hit Pigdin Cooperative Becomes Worker-Owned Restaurant. And this was a particularly interesting story for me, Ray, because I think you and I talk about the financials of some of these businesses that are doing really well. Some more often than not, we're covering them because they're going poorly, and we kind of want to have it be a cautionary tale for people just to make sure that, people aren't making mistakes or they're not getting their selves too far over their skis financially or doing the back of napkin stuff that we talk about, basically to make sure that all of this stuff pencils out and you're not setting yourself up for a business that doesn't have a sturdy financial foundation here. But I think what's also really, really interesting about like some of these examples or pushbacks people will have about, this is too capitalistic or, these are greedy business owners. In a lot of ways, there's other ways to structure your business that are more than possible for you to explore. Nobody is preventing you from doing what these individuals have done. Nobody is deciding to say, okay, well, you need to exclusively be this, exploit your employees, extract from them, at all, burn people out. You as the business owner, and that's, again, cook to chef to entrepreneur, when you make that leap to entrepreneur, you realize that you have other skills that you need to develop. And some of this can really come to play as you're deciding what your business is going to look like. And so I wanted to, again, if we're going to talk about some of these negative outcomes or these quote unquote stereotypical outcomes we might see with restaurants, I want to also bring to light the other options that are on the table or available for you as long as you're willing to do the work and decide that we're not going to be like everybody else. We can't follow the standard playbook for some of this stuff. And so I want to dig into some of the implications of some of this stuff because it's not exactly as easy as, okay, well, we're just going to flip the switch one day and all of a sudden all of our employees are owners and we're profit sharing equally and there's no problems that we have to deal with down the line. I've covered other stories on this on the past that have unfortunately like crashed and burned. I never wish ill on any of these people's businesses, but it is something where you deal with a different set of problems when you set up your business in a not so typical way. And so Pigdin Cooperative open since September at Fisherman's Terminal, is a rare worker cooperative. The Pakleb brothers are 2 of 6 current worker owners, each with an equal vote and voice. Newer employees can apply to join them if they wish, after a year of full-time work and a $1,000 investment into the restaurant, end quote. And so all of this is really interesting because it is not something where on day one you get quote unquote equity, you get an ownership split, you get a seat at the table to participate in meetings, you get a back end look at the finances, or the ability to, again, like have the same quote unquote say or voice or voting rights as the original owners of the restaurant. I think that's one thing from a control perspective that might prevent owner operators from doing something like this, is this idea of giving up control. And then I want to go into some other quotes here. Quote, a goal for the business was, quote, changing the culture of restaurants, Seth told me when mapping out our plans in 2024. Generally speaking, quote, line cooks are often underestimated and undervalued, if not mistreated, says writer Tiffany Rand. Tiffany is a friend of the show. She's local here in Seattle. She's a Pigdin coworker. She's a Pigdin worker owner and founder of Baba Leo, a Taiwanese pop-up. Shout out to her and her amazing pop-ups that she's been doing. Even back from my pop-up days, we got connected because we were both kind of like pop-up people in Seattle, and Eater was like writing about both of us kind of at the same time. Another quote, the U.S. is home to an estimated 1,300 worker co-ops, a number that has tripled over the past decade, according to the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, end quote. So that's also something where it's like, it's not the majority. You're definitely a minority in the total number of businesses, at least here in the U.S., but it's not like this is the first example of this. And so is there a world where you can kind of like have some sort of hive mind and get some sort of insights from some of these other business owners, what's working for you, any of that? And I like when, stories like this that are not standard get published so that people can see this and say, maybe there's elements of this that I want to cherry pick and kind of like build into my business. But there's also risks with that, because if someone else has figured out something that is pretty rock solid and it works for them and they have some structures in place, and you're going to decide, okay, I'm going to do 80% of this and I'm going to change this one variable, does that make the foundations of everything all come crashing down? I don't necessarily know. Just your mileage may vary on some of these things. Quote, members hold weekly meetings on what's happening to vote on decisions. Reich pulls up the minutes for the most recent ones. A major topic was approving the tip pool policy that they had developed with their lawyer. So far, members have yet to hit a roadblock where they can't reach an agreement, Reich says. Sometimes there's a lot of feelings around a decision where maybe we need to take a pause. Menus so far spark the biggest debates, end quote. And that's something that, as Ray, you and I have talked about, this co-chef idea, which I think we're going to get to in a future episode. It's like been a theme. It's been a trend that we've been covering on recent episodes. Is this thing that you genuinely have to grapple with. The benefit of this, single person at the top, this is the face of the restaurant, this is the leader of the, the culinary program or the restaurant, or however you want to phrase it, is that decisions can all flow through that one person. And it turns into this like dictatorial arrangement where it's like, okay, what does Ray have to say about this? And everything goes through Ray. That's the final arbiter of how things are going to be decided. And that's relatively productive from the sense of it's not death by committee. There's not a big bureaucratic process to all of this stuff. It's just, what does Ray think? Yes or no, end of story, maybe provide an alternative. But with some of these other things where it is everybody needs to come together, you have to kind of factor some of those things in. I don't know of, like if there's processes in your restaurant, if you're listening here, where you're keeping minutes for your meetings and you're deciding that this is something we're going to document and ultimately say, okay, this is something that we have the ability to review. We're going to go back on this. We're going to, keep track of some of these things. But this is something that you kind of have to introduce if you're going to say that this is the structure that you're going to go with. And so there's more information that you can kind of read about if this would be something that would be of interest to you, or if you kind of want some more insights. I kind of picked out some of my more, pithy operational legal structure. Again, like things like working with a lawyer being really, really important so that all of your ducks are in a row. The time gate that they've added to this is really interesting. So you have to work for us for a year full time before you have the opportunity to come on as a worker owner. And then the $1,000 investment is also interesting because that is something where there is like skin in the game, not just from a time perspective, but financially, where it is this idea of you're going to pay into this and that's going to get you potentially access to something like a profit share and the ability to quote unquote own this business. I don't know if you have thoughts.
See, a lot of operators complain that their employees are unmotivated. If there is financial incentive, if there is an entrepreneurial burst from your, putting $1,000 in, being there for a year to get that buy-in to work towards that. I would, if this is successful, I think it's a great model to go forward. I mean, it gives more of a share of the company to a bunch of different people, and it allows for that success to ride on their own motivation rather than this like top down, I pay you money, you do the work, and then I wonder why you don't care as much as me when I reap more of the rewards than you. So if this model could work, I would love it to be adopted more so throughout the industry.
I want to pivot to another kind of trend that we've been noticing, but I think that this is really gaining steam with a couple of announcements that have happened on X this week. There's a platform called Dinner, DNNR, which kind of falls into this bucket or trend that we've been covering on the show, which is this other push to in real life experiences and moments. This is not a cooking creator on Instagram. This is not a CPG brand that is just a jar on the shelf of the grocery store, not to discredit any of those types of businesses. But I think we have noticed this rise in getting people off of their screens, going and touching grass, so to speak. And the Free Press has also partnered with Dinner, DNNR, to actually host a series of like in real life experiences. They're calling it a supper club, which is kind of like another collaboration that we've seen in. This is a organization that is a media company, the Free Press, and they are saying, we want to bring smart people together around a table to break bread. That is something that I think we have also we called this, you know what I mean? Like this is in some of our prediction episodes. We've noticed this is a trend there's a brand that wants a physical footprint and they need help to kind of bring that to life. The person who I'm getting a lot of this information from is the founder and the CEO of Dinner. Her name is Ray. She goes by Ray, but I'm almost positive it's Rachel. Last name is Lambert. I'm almost positive. It's hard to tell because all of the, letters are kind of in her X handle here. But she was basically launching this, and she said, a white labeled dinner club engine that lets any creator, community, or brand launch their own dinner club in one city or around the world. And so the idea here is that you customize your club page and short personality quiz, and then all you have to do is announce it. Your audience takes the quiz, pays to book a seat, and our matching engine does the rest. Tables of 6, smartly matched, in restaurants revealed the morning of. After dinner, everyone meets up for cocktails with the other tables. It's part dinner party, part mystery, part social magic. The algorithm is yours, customized to your community, and the night unfolds like a beautiful game of Clue. Compared to meetups, something wild happens. Because people pay, everyone shows up. Because it's dinner, not networking, everyone shows up on time. And because they already share something in common, every table feels like they were meant to be. And then under the why it works section, they say, there's something ancient about breaking bread together. We've been gathering around the table for thousands of years as the oldest technology for human connection. Dinner makes it effortless. We've taken everything we've learned from years of building meetup communities and made it plug and play. The restaurant reservations, the group matching, the reminders, all handled. And so this just is a not so, I think is the real kicker here. And I think it's the reason they're getting the partnerships they're getting. This person, as a founder, has done meetups for other large media companies before creating Dinner. It was more around like meetups around shared interests. I can't recall the name of the company before, but they would take listeners of Tim Ferriss's podcast, and Tim was having like the 1,000th episode of the podcast or something like that. And they decided that they were going to do, a meetup in Paris, a meetup in London, a meetup in New York, a meetup in San Diego. And all of these people would basically come together through this platform that this person had before Dinner and give these people. My First Million did one as well. And this was this, you're a media company owner, or you're the personality of this channel, and you don't want to go through the headache of the RSVPing and all of the logistics. And so having a partner who has the ability to do this is really, really crucial. But also this partnered with restaurants. I think they basically decided like meetups are cool, but how can we make this even more impactful? And the experiential side of it is really, really key to include restaurants and arguably now chefs into something like this. And so I'm curious if anybody in the comments has been a chef of a restaurant where something from Dinner has been coordinated and how that works and how you're noticing the way that all of this ends up kind of like moving and shaping. I think that there's really interesting opportunities for either Dinner or, like a chef to basically decide that there's going to be event outposts that they create instead of having like a standalone restaurant. It's going to be event spaces that ultimately, because again, this is something that is only gaining steam. Individual companies are hiring in real life team members full time as part of, the way that they're recruiting. And this is almost like a agency, so to speak, that helps to put some of this together. And it's been something I've been keeping an eye on over the past, let's call it 18 months. And I just wanted to bring it up here if it ends up offering any sort of opportunities to you as a listener. I don't know if you have thoughts, Ray.
I just like the ownership aspect of it. I think also just the ability to kind of brand it yourself is pretty interesting. Would you consider using this at this state?
Yes. I think that so I have gotten invited to a lot of dinner parties in like the entrepreneurship kind of like space in Seattle in the past. They're often at people's houses. They are sometimes at, like up and coming restaurants or bars. And it is something where you're often at the mercy of the host to make sure that, some of those elements of, I don't know anybody here. I don't know what we're doing. Is there a theme? Like, who do I get sat next to? The fact that this is so kind of templated and structured, at least in the initial product that they've launched on launch day, there's been, developments since then. I think the Free Press and the way that they're doing their partnership is doing things maybe a little bit differently. But I think so many of those logistics, if it's not a organizer who has the experience of doing some of these things, it can sometimes fall apart because the host isn't there the whole time because they're behind the scenes trying to get dinner sorted. The matchmaking is either really bad or, you just get sat next to somebody where they're going to talk your ear off the whole time. There's no mechanism of changing contexts or environments. It's either too big of a table or the host doesn't have rules at the table, where I've been sat at tables, it's a table of 15 people and it just devolves into, like these little side conversations that are happening the whole time. I've been to really productive dinner parties where the host genuinely says one person speaking at a time. That's a really good way to do a dinner party because everybody is locked in and, you don't have to have the same conversation 18 times, because when you're going to give a diatribe about your business or what it is that you're working on or a problem that you're going to be vulnerable with the group, you don't have to do that several times, because when you're speaking, everybody is looking at you. And what this, what Ray has created here, where it's a table of 6, allows for that. And so,
yeah, it reminds me of So Far almost. Maybe not like the obviously it's not dinner, but it's like the idea of like kind of there's a little bit of mystery, a little bit of intrigue for musical guests, and then you kind of show up. So that's why I asked. I like it, and I think it'd be a fun tool to use.
And it just solves a lot of the problems. Like this person doing so much of this event stuff for so long clearly knows some of the common pitfalls of this. And so, okay, well, if it's just an invite and it's optional and we hope to see you there type of thing, pay into it means that, again, you have some skin in the game. And so you're going to want to show up. You not having, getting expectations built up on this thing because we let you know 3 weeks in advance what restaurant it's going to be, and you're going to go in and you're going to, have a meal at the restaurant the week before to kind of scope it out just to make sure that, I may or may not like this place, and that's going to be the excuse that I give for where I don't want to go. You don't have the ability to do that with this because we're not going to tell you where this is happening until the day of or the day before. And so all of that, I think from a variables perspective, think about some of these things that you can, like when I really talk about on this show, the ability to include other variables in your experience, these are case studies in that. These are, like a dinner party on its face might be, like you might bucket it in one place in your mind, but by having the ability to sit with how you architect things and how you design things, it gives you the ability to make something differentiated and something that's going to get the attention of people in this world of people want more in real life experiences. But if you bring people together, I mean, this bashing of the word community. Community has become the most overused word on the internet, but a community isn't a group chat. And so I think all of that is just really, really interesting to cover. Okay. Last piece is just kind of a quick hit. Okay. Last piece is just an interesting quick hit. It's just something that, again, came across my feed and I wanted to share it. It's a pea peeling robot. We're going to leave a link in the description if you want to go ahead and check it out. It's basically it looks like a box, and it has just like a hole in it that you put fava beans, English peas, anything that needs shelling into this machine, and you put a bowl underneath it and out pop shelled peas. And it is this funny thing, as someone who has shucked probably too many peas in my career, it is typically this, you're standing there over a countertop and you have, your big hotel pan of peas and you just shell into it and you kind of like discard the shells. I don't know necessarily how fast it goes or how, potentially quick it's going to be or aid in your process. If you have the touch for it and the peas are at the right time or the fava beans are at the right time of the season, You can go relatively fast. I'm not going to say that I'm faster than this robot, but I do think that it's an interesting, like a chef shared this, and it was something where I was like, oh, interesting. It's not big. It is not large. Like it doesn't look like it has the ability to, like, I wish the insertion point was a little bit bigger so you could actually move through things a little bit faster. You're literally going like one, thing at a time. It's going to save your fingers from, like, I'm trying to play devil's advocate for this product and make sure that, like, people don't have if you don't have the finger dexterity to do something like this might be really, really useful. I don't like the idea that this is something where you you can't multitask. You still have to kind of stand there and do this. So this is just another one of those funny examples, Ray, kind of similar to your drink making example of, I still have to be an active participant in this process. It's just something that I saw and I thought it was funny. And if it's of interest and I think you want to spend the $160 on this pea peeling robot and give it a try, please let us know your thoughts in the comments down below.
Man, what a find, Justin. What a find.
Look at me go. Look at me go. All right. Like the video if you have not already. Subscribe if you're not subscribed already. We're now pushing to 3,000 subscribers. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a rating. It really, really helps the show. And we'll see you folks next week. Thanks for listening.